Too late for everything, just in time for nothing. A true crime in the American tradition. The alarm went off at 4:47 a.m., 13 minutes before it was supposed to, because the phone was dying and a dying phone can't keep proper time. Anthony Jr. knew this the way he knew everything about being poor, from the inside, without ever being taught. He silenced it before it woke the neighbors through walls so thin he could hear Mrs. Petrocelli on the other side change the channel at midnight. He lay in the dark for 60 seconds, staring at the ceiling of an apartment he no longer technically had the right to occupy. The eviction notice, printed on salmon pink paper, was taped to his door. He'd turned it face in so he didn't have to look at the words every time he came home. 14 days, it had said. That was 11 days ago. Anthony Jr., nobody called him that except bill collectors and the voice in his head, was 34 years old and had held, by rough count, 22 jobs in his adult life. Warehouse picker at Amazon, night stalker at Kroger, forklift operator, delivery driver, call center representative fired for losing his patience with a woman who screamed at him for 40 minutes about a blender. He'd done everything right, or tried to, and the math never worked. The numbers didn't lie but they also didn't care. Right now he was running 3 streams simultaneously, the way people who've never been poor think of as admirable hustle and people who have been poor know as just drowning in slow motion. Weekdays. Data entry from 7 to 3 at a logistics company downtown, then Uber Eats from 4 until his body gave out, usually around 11. Weekends. Unloading freight at a wholesale food distributor, cash under the table, 5 in the morning until noon. The math still didn't work. In the margins of all that he was building something, a mobile detailing business cards already printed, logo designed by a guy on Fiverr for $40 he probably shouldn't have spent. He had one regular client, a dentist named Drive Kim who paid him $180 every other Saturday. He kept that number in his head like a rosary bead. The loan had started as $800. His name was Desmond, though nobody in the neighborhood used his real name. They called him D-Money, which he'd have found embarrassing except that Desmond had stopped being embarrassed about anything around the time he'd arranged for a man named Curtis to fall down a flight of stairs over a debt of $400. That had been 6 years ago. Curtis walked with a limp now. Desmond walked with impunity. Anthony had gone to Desmond 9 months ago when his car broke down and he needed the car to work, and without work there was no fixing the car. The logic of poverty is circular that way. $800 at 30% monthly interest, the terms explained verbally in a parking lot behind a laundromat, no paperwork because paperwork created evidence and evidence created problems. 9 months, 30% monthly. Anthony had paid back nearly $2,000 across 14 installments and somehow owed, according to Desmond's arithmetic, $1,100 more. You understand how interest work, right? Desmond had said, the last time they'd spoken face to face, a Tuesday evening outside a gas station. He'd said it gently, like a teacher, which was somehow worse than if he'd said it with menace. Anthony understood. He just didn't have it. 2 weeks after that conversation, a man Anthony had never seen before started appearing in places Anthony recognized. At the bus stop, in the parking lot of the logistics company. Once, sitting in a gray Camry outside his building at 1 in the morning. Anthony started taking different routes. He stopped going to the laundromat near Desmond's territory. He ate lunch at his desk instead of the sandwich place on the corner. He moved through his own neighborhood like a man in enemy country. The church was Pentecostal, on a side street between a vape shop and a check cashing place, which Anthony had always thought was either God's dark humor or a very pointed lesson. He'd started going 3 months ago, first just for the music, which was real and unironic in a way almost nothing else in his life was. Then for Pastor Elaine, who was 62 and ran the congregation the way a good grandmother runs a kitchen, with warmth and without any tolerance for nonsense. God is not a vending machine, she said one Sunday, looking directly at Anthony in a way that made him wonder if she could see the lottery tickets in his jacket pocket. You don't put in your prayers and wait for the blessing to drop. You grow toward the light. The fruit comes when you're ready for it. He wanted to believe her. He half believed her. He also bought 2 Powerball tickets on the way home and 1 scratch-off that won him $6, which he put back into another scratch-off that won nothing. The gambling was a tax he paid on hope. Casino twice a month when he could scrape together $50, sitting at the nickel slots for 3 hours because the slots didn't ask him anything, didn't need anything from him, just flashed and hummed and made him feel, briefly, like fate was a conversation he could participate in. Poker at Marcus's apartment when there was a game, which he was better at than his luck suggested. He'd won big twice in the last 2 years, once, $400, which he'd used to cover his phone bill and buy groceries. The other time, $800, which went directly to Desmond. He wasn't a degenerate gambler. He was a man applying the only variable he could find to an equation that didn't balance. The eviction happened on a Thursday. He came home from the logistics job at 3:20 and found his key wouldn't work in a locksmith standing in the hallway looking apologetic in the professional way of people paid to do unpleasant things. Mrs. Petrocelli's door was cracked open 2 inches. He didn't look at it. His things were in boxes in the property manager's office on the first floor. He stood in that office and signed documents and said nothing. The property manager, a young man named Brent who wore khakis and clearly found this portion of his job distressing, told him there was a city shelter on DeKalb Avenue. Anthony nodded. He did not go to the shelter. He put his 2 boxes in a storage unit he rented for $47 a month and spent the next 9 days on Marcus's couch, which smelled like old takeout, and then 3 nights in his car. He slept in his car and prayed. Not for money, exactly. He'd stopped asking God for money because Pastor Elaine had suggested this and because it felt, in the small hours in a cold car, like maybe she was right. He prayed for steadiness, for the ability to keep moving without knowing what he was moving toward. He prayed the way you'd talk to someone you weren't sure was listening but couldn't stop talking to anyway. The Holy Spirit, he felt sometimes, was talking back. Not in words, in the quality of a morning. In a stranger who smiled at him for no reason. In the weird fact that on his lowest night, sleeping in the car in a Walmart parking lot, he woke at 3 a.m. to find a security guard knocking on his window, and the guard, a man about his father's age, had given him a cup of coffee from a thermos and told him his own story, which was worse than Anthony's and which had turned out better. It comes, the guard had said. It comes when you stop chasing it so hard you can't see it. The ticket was a mistake. He was at the Sunoco on Friday evening, killing time before Marcus got off work so he could get back to the couch. He'd had $8 in his pocket, literally $8, which he'd been planning to use for a sandwich and tomorrow's bus fare. He'd bought the Mega Millions because there was a banner in the window that said $100 million and that number, in his current circumstances, represented a completely different human life, and sometimes you just needed to touch the idea of a different life, even if it cost you $2. He put the ticket in the breast pocket of his jacket, closest to his body, which he did sometimes when he felt serious about something. He forgot about it until Monday. Sunday he spent at church. Stayed for the full service and then the Bible study after, which he'd been avoiding because he felt like a fraud showing up to Bible study from a couch that wasn't his, broke, running from a loan shark, gambling on the weekends. Pastor Elaine made him stay. They read from Matthew 6. Consider the lilies of the field. He didn't cry in church but he came close, in the particular private way of a man raised to equate tears with failure. He felt, walking out into the Sunday afternoon, that something had changed. Not outside. Inside, some valve had opened. He'd been holding himself so tight for so long, bracing against the next blow, that he'd forgotten what it felt like to stand without bracing. He stood on the church steps for a moment and breathed. Monday morning he checked the lottery numbers. He checked them 3 times on his phone. Then he took the ticket out of his breast pocket and held it in both hands under the fluorescent lights of Marcus's bathroom and checked it a 4th time. He sat down on the edge of the bathtub. $100 million. He sat there for a while. His hands were not shaking. He thought about that, why his hands weren't shaking, and realized it was because somewhere between the parking lot and the church steps and the guard with the thermos, he'd made a decision, without knowing he'd made it, to let go. And the letting go had made room for something to arrive. He thought about his mother. He thought about the Sam and Pink eviction notice. He thought about Dr. Kim's car, which he detailed every other Saturday with a precision that was closer to reverence than labor. He called Pastor Elaine. He did not call Desmond. He should have. He would understand, much too late, why he should have called Desmond first. Instead he called Pastor Elaine, who shouted in a register he'd never heard from her before, and then he called a lottery lawyer whose number he found online, and then he called his cousin in Atlanta who was the only family he had left, and somewhere in the chain of calls the information crossed whatever invisible line separates private knowledge from neighborhood intelligence. By Tuesday morning, Desmond knew. They took him from the parking lot of the Lottery Commission office at 4:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. 2 men, the same gray Camry, fast and professional in the way that suggested practice. They drove him to a warehouse in an industrial strip on the edge of the city that smelled like hydraulic fluid and standing water. Desmond was already there, sitting in a folding chair like a man who'd arranged a meeting. "Congratulations," Desmond said. There was a woman zip-tied to a pipe in the corner. Anthony didn't know her. She was a bookkeeper named Renata who had worked for Desmond for 3 years and had, that morning, made the mistake of threatening to go to the police about his operation. She had been there since noon. She was alive, but she had been crying for 4 hours and her face showed it. One of Desmond's men, a boy really, 20 at most, had tried to grab Renata's phone when they brought her in and she'd fought back and he'd done something that shouldn't have been done, something that couldn't be undone, and now there was a decision about what to do about Renata and a decision about what to do about Anthony, and Desmond was a practical man who understood that decisions multiplied if you let them. "You got $100 million, Desmond said to Anthony. "And you couldn't call me first." "I was going to pay you," Anthony said. "That was the plan. The plan was you call me. Before the lawyers. Before the cousin in Atlanta." He shook his head. "You made me come find you. That's disrespectful." Desmond's phone buzzed. He looked at it. His expression shifted. Not much, but enough. He turned the phone toward Anthony. It was a news alert. Local man wins $100 million Mega Millions jackpot. There was Anthony's face, a photo from the Lottery Commission's press office, time-stamped 40 minutes ago. They both looked at it. "Well," Desmond said, and then didn't say anything else for a moment. The math had changed. Anthony was no longer a problem to be quietly solved. He was a name attached to a number attached to a photograph that was now, in some server somewhere, permanent. Killing him now would bring a gravity that Desmond had always been careful to avoid. He was silent for a long time. "You're going to wire me $3 million, Desmond said finally. "That's what I want. $3 million. Clean. I'll give you 5, Anthony said. Desmond looked at him. 5, and we're done. Forever." Another silence. "Go," Desmond said. Anthony walked out of the warehouse. He called 911 from the parking lot about Renata. He did not mention Desmond's name and he did not go back inside. The police found her 11 minutes later. She told them everything, about Desmond, about his operation, about the young man who'd hurt her. She told them about a man named Anthony who'd walked out of that warehouse and called for help from a parking lot. Desmond was arrested 48 hours later. 3 of his associates were arrested over the following week. The young man who'd hurt Renata was sentenced to 11 years. Anthony did not wire anyone $3 million, because Desmond was no longer in a position to collect it. He paid the lottery taxes. He bought his mother a house, which she had deserved for a long time. He started the detailing business for real, 6 vans, 4 employees, a commercial account with a fleet of delivery vehicles that Dr. Kim had connected him to. He moved into an apartment on the 14th floor with windows that faced east. He watched the sunrise sometimes, before the city started asking things of him. He'd won $100 million. He'd been kidnapped. He'd been evicted. He'd slept in his car and eaten from vending machines and ignored phone calls from creditors at 3 in the morning. The breakthrough had arrived just in time. And much too late to save him from everything he'd had to become to survive long enough to receive it. He thought about that sometimes. About the distance between just in time and too late. How thin the wall between them was. How many people were on the wrong side of it through nothing but the width of a lottery ticket. He went back to the church. He brought a check that was large enough to make Brent from the property management company wince when he eventually heard about it on the local news. He sat in the same pew. Pastor Elaine looked at him the way she always had, not at his money, not at his story, but at whatever was underneath both. "You ready now?" she said. He didn't know what for, exactly. "Yeah," he said, "I think so." Inspired by the American tradition of wanting too much, having too little, and sometimes, against all reasonable odds, surviving the distance between the two.